Well, hello and welcome to a special edition of Bristol Sport TV on this International Women's Day 2023. And I'm pleased to have alongside me in the studio Daisie Mayes, who juggles playing career for Bristol Bears and is also operations manager over at the Bears HPC, High Performance Centre, and Grace Williams, who is the general manager of Bristol City Women's side. Thank you both for joining us here in the studio. And well, it is a day to celebrate women. It's nice to have an all-women studio here. Every year there is a theme to International Women's Day, and this year's theme is about embracing equity. And I guess with our women's teams, it's nice to be able to celebrate that there is actually equity in our women's teams, in that you are one club, Bristol City and Bristol Bears. The women are fully integrated into both the training centres.
About 2 years ago now, we moved our women's team to the High Performance Centre and kind of sat down with Pat at the time, and we worked out, like, how is this going to look? We were in the transition of recruiting for our new head coach, and Pat kind of went away and said, okay, I'll speak to all the heads of departments, see how that's going to look, map out schedule, but Daisie, I want you to sort of come to me and tell me what sort of areas we'll be working in, what do they need, what resources do we need, who have you got, like numbers. And it was such an interesting period, but I'll always say now, over the past 2 years, it's probably still one of my biggest achievements. And it was the day that the sign got put on the changing rooms door of women's changing rooms. Yeah, I got quite emotional, because all that hard work and being a player myself, being able to see that we finally had that place there and we were fully integrated, meant so much to me.
Yeah. And you've mentioned Pat Lamb there. I mean, I know Nigel Pearson has been sort of integral into the women's bedding into the Robins High Performance Centre as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's great working with women every day, but it's great when you've got a male that empowers you as well, and particularly your team. And something that I sort of won't forget is Nigel looking at Lauren and I, the head coach, and just sort of saying, well, we're a first team and you're a first team, so therefore you have access to everything we have access to, and sort of understanding what our needs are. Relatively aren't that different from a male's team, because we're both first team professional clubs, and he's sort of been integral in the building, but also leading his own staff and changing certain mindsets amongst the building where women haven't been fully integrated in the performance centre. So yeah, absolutely, it's been great amongst other staff in and around the building to ensure that, you know, we are just the same as any other team that's performing there. Yeah,
you're elite athletes at your place of work. Daisie, I mean, it'd be good to get an insight from both of you as to how you've ended up in the careers that you've ended up. You know, as a youngster, were you always wanting to play rugby? Did you think you would always work in professional sport? Because I know growing up there wasn't really avenues that I thought, oh yeah, I can see that. Was that something that you had in your childhood, or? So
I started rugby. My mum and dad took my brother to his first session, and as a very bossy 6-year-old, stood on the sideline and kind of bossed my parents into letting me have a go as well. And at the time there was no other girls in the junior section, so they didn't even think that was possible for me. And it was the coach at the time who said, you know, come and have a go. So I joined in and absolutely never looked back. And it's funny because at the time I did both rugby, dance, and theatre school. So on a Sunday morning, I'd go to rugby, and then I'd quickly get changed, and my mum would rush me then to my dance class. And I can remember my dance teachers would say, Daisy, you've still got mud behind your ears or something. So yeah, I think my mum hoped that I would get out of it just for the sake of, you know, not overusing the washing machine, but no, I've stuck at it. And in terms of a career, I never thought that I'd be working in rugby, especially in the capacity that I am. My education, so my degrees are in sport management, but I 100% never thought that I would be, one, working for a rugby team, but two, working for Bristol Bears. But I'm glad to be part of an era, a new era, I feel, that's being female-led in Bristol Sport and Bristol Bears.
Yeah, I mean, it must sort of... I know there's other rugby teams that they have the women's teams sharing alongside, but I certainly always feel that whenever I go up to Bears HPC, it's almost pushing against an open door. You know, it does stem from the top, and in terms of, you know, the Lansdowne family and Gavin Marshall, who's had a key part of it, Pat Lamb, this integration piece has been led, and it does have a trickle-down effect, because, you know, I know that the male players see you as perfectly normal as being there now.
Yeah, 100%. And like Grace mentioned, it comes from your senior managers as well. So one thing that Pat integrated massively was that the women's staff come under the heads of departments that were formerly of the men. So one example, Kevin Geary, head of athletic performance, but that includes of the men, the women and the senior academy. So he will oversee all 3 programmes, and although they will have their own leads of those programmes, they'll feed into Kevin. And Kev's been like a really great advocate for the women's programme. As soon as we moved there, he ensured that we had the same resources, the same access to the same facilities. So for example, working out timing so that the girls could get in and use the hydrotherapy pool and the sauna and the same supplements. And it's just those key things, and like you mentioned about like changing the attitudes of the leaders for the trickle-down effect. And it helps that, you know, Gab and Marshall heavily, who works in both City and Bears, is such an advocate for female leadership. I think it gives you a lot of confidence as a female staff member when you know your managers are right behind you.
And it empowers you to speak up, like, knowing both of you and knowing both how you work. Neither of you are shy about having to speak up. But the good thing is you feel that you can and that you're not going to get offsided for it. Grace, I know you were smiling while Daisie was repeating the story of, you know, access. It's funny though, but actually the movement flow of athletes through a building is actually quite complicated when, you know, actually, you know, the women's team train similar times to the men, but there's had to be some flux and some give, because it's really difficult to just manage that flow through the building.
Absolutely. We've got a brilliant operations manager at HPC, Izzy, another strong, great female that we have working with us. We've got 4 full-time squads essentially on at the training ground, where it was potentially designed for 1 or 2 and males. So to fit in another team and a female team, we've had to adapt, and we have to have that flexibility. We put our schedules in, and sometimes there's some movement here and sometimes some movement there, but the good thing about that is every team is flexible. It's not just, oh, well, you know, you can come in after, or you can do this, or you can do that. It's okay, what access do we need, and how can we put all these different jigsaws so it flows? But I'd like to think that although there's some times that we're behind the scenes rushing around trying to move everyone around, the players and the athletes that are there to perform and to play football, when they come in, just do that, and they don't need to worry about what time they need to be or what they need to do, because they have access to everything they need to when they come into work for the day. Yeah.
I mean, Daisie's touched on her career coming into working full-time in professional sport. Yours, I think you had older male siblings, so you were another younger female sibling going, can I join too? Why can't I?
Yeah, I've got 3 older brothers, so the youngest and the only girl, so I'm sorry to my mum that I didn't turn out to be the dancer that she wanted me to be as well. I followed exactly what they were doing. I wanted to play football and I wanted to do that, and at home I was constantly battling for my voice to be heard, so that's why I'm sort of strong and confident in ensuring that that happens now in the workplace. We're very well supported in male senior management here, but there's obviously still times that you need to make your voice heard. But yeah, I grew up playing football. I always played with boys as well, so there wasn't any girls sort of teams or opportunities as I was growing up until I got a little bit older into my college years. And then I gave up football. I wasn't taking it seriously anymore. It wasn't aspiring for me to be a full-time footballer, because I didn't know that access was there. I went to university and studied sport, and I thought that meant that I had to be a PE teacher. I didn't know there was any other sort of opportunities in sport, and now I'm sort of living the best job that I can imagine I can do, and enjoying it and being challenged every day, which is exactly what I needed. And
I mean, it's interesting, you know, sort of saying there wasn't that awareness that you could follow this path until you suddenly sort of fell down this path, and it is that this being visible. I know neither of you were that keen to sit in the studio because you wanted to have, you know, either the professional players, the first team, constant first team, you know, high profile players in. But actually it's all of the women behind the scenes. You've mentioned Izzy Mitchell, you know, Sophie Dyer up at the football club. She's, you know, another strong female working in men's football as the club secretary. Actually, unless you see those positions and think, oh no, that is attainable, you don't know that you can do it.
Absolutely, like the women need to be celebrated in all aspects, and obviously I work in women's football. However, that doesn't mean that just because you're a woman you have to work in women's football. It's across sport. You can work male, female. Yourself, obviously, working across the group. We've got some really great females that we should probably celebrate a bit more, but you can't help but want to focus on those players that are also inspiring those little girls. I'm not sure how many little girls want to be an operations manager, but it is there and it's available for you, so absolutely.
But we're all hugely privileged to work in careers that we love. Sport is exciting, you know, the passion of sport. You know, why wouldn't anyone want to be an operations manager or a GM or running a club? You know, it'll be the CEOs will be the next bit where we start to see that breakthrough, I think, over the next 10 or 15 years. There has been a lot of change. Well, we talk about the number of changes that you guys have seen. I mean, over this last year, I was reflecting back before we came in to do this chat, and there have been so many achievements to be celebrated over this last year. I mean, if you want to touch on some of them, you know, just the for me, one of the goosebump moments was the names of the players on the backs of the shirts. You know, in football, it's probably led the way slightly more, but in terms of the Bears team, that was a real threshold moment.
Yeah, 100%. So we were the first team, especially in the Allianz Premiership, and correct me if I'm wrong, but even in the Northern Hemisphere, I haven't seen of any other team that have, like, Premiership team that have put the names on the back of women's shirts, and it was revolutionary for us. And I think the moment it hit home was actually when it was presented to the players. So we did a bit of like a ceremony in our team meeting before the game, and players were presented with their shirt, and some players got quite emotional seeing, and a lot of them were saying, like, that's my family name on the back of my shirt, and I'm going out on the pitch with my family. And I'm sure lots of people have seen it. If you haven't, I'd really encourage you to go and look at the video of Lucy Burgess when we played at Ashton Gate against Wasps. A young girl had Lucy's surname printed on the back of her shirt, and Lucy, bless her, got very emotional.
It was at the end of the game, thankfully.
Yeah, but that's Lucy all over.
But it was, I mean,
but it just meant.
But how incredible is that we're sitting here, as it was 2022, I think it was October, November time, wasn't it? You know, there was a bit of me that was, I was so proud that we'd done it, but there was also a bit of me thinking, I can't believe there's something fundamentally depressing that we're celebrating this, that we've done this in 2022.
100%, and I think it really highlighted the need for it, because as soon as we did it, there's now players there's young girls that recognise the name on the back of the shirt, and I think our mascots, the people interested in our mascot packages have increased, and the girls know who the players are, and they know who their favourite players are, and they speak to their friends and they speak to their family about them. And something that's been really encouraging for me over the past 12 months or so, cross-sport as well, and I think it definitely came off the back of the Euros, is I think conversations are being had about women's sports without any reference to gender, and you hear surnames being talked about, and obviously I think as a female you recognise, like, people in the Lionesses, and you kind of twig that, okay, there's a man and his son talking about two Lioness players, and for me it just means so much more that there's no reference to gender, and they're just talking about their ability on the pitch and how that their young players now aspiring to be like them, whether they're man or woman or
which comes back to that embracing equity. You know, that is the definition of it. I mean, you're nodding your head there, Grace, about, you know, the Lionesses game. We were privileged to be here to watch it, and it was incredible. It isn't about a women's game of football. It was an international. You know, it was an incredible event of football. It wasn't that we were watching women's football.
Absolutely, and when Daisie sort of talks about that emotional attachment to it, as I said, when I was younger, I couldn't even play in a girls' football team, let alone aspire to be a professional footballer. And then I'm watching a game with over 25,000 fans in attendance and selling out stadiums, which is happening across the WSL and in the Women's Championship in Main Stadia, and to think, wow, these people are here to come and watch a football game, a women's football game, and to hear them speaking about it, it's quite emotional. I was at the opening game of the Euros at Old Trafford, which sold out, and I was like, God, like, this is what you look at on TV for the men's game, and you think, oh, imagine that happening in the women's game, and it didn't seem achievable, and now it's seeing achievable. And it sounds strange to say it, but groups of young boys and their dads and just kids that don't care, they want to watch football and they're enjoying it, so just let them do it and enjoy it and see some great football on display.
And that's the bit that it comes back to, the quality, doesn't it? You know, the level has raised by women's football being able to be full-time professionals. You know, we were commenting about how incredibly fast, you know, often when you're standing physically watching a match, you realise how quick, you know, some of the players are, and you think, well, that's what professionalism does, enabling someone to train full-time to give them an equal playing field does bring that level up. And as you say, there were so many groups of young lads there, you know, boys and girls that were watching it from their various football teams that had come down to Ashton Gate. They were just there to watch really high quality standard football, and they were rewarded with that.
Absolutely, and naturally, as things grow off the pitch, on the pitch is going to grow. So giving them access, the equal access to, I guess, like the HPC that we've got in rugby and football. So by giving the time to these players off of the pitch, giving them the facilities, the time, the money, and the appreciation they deserve, naturally the performance on the pitch is going to improve, and that's just going to go together then with the more opportunities they have off the pitch, and the more money, the more investment, the more partners that come involved. It's just going to keep growing and keep going, and it's been celebrated a lot, as you said, in the last, I'd probably say, like 3 years where it's really grown. I've been watching it grow for the last 10, 15 years behind the scenes, but it's really sort of, I'd say, off the back of the Euros. It's in front of people more.
That, you know, that reward of success means it follows on. We've talked about the names on the back of shirts. There was, you know, another celebration this year was, I know we did a joint announcement between Bears and City with the change in shorts as well. You know, again, it seems one of those ones where it's like, absolutely, to use the probably poorly changed words, bleeding obvious, that why of course wouldn't you change the colour of shorts? You know, so many women feel uncomfortable wearing white trousers or shorts when they're on their period, and yet actually we make our elite teams play in this coloured short when in a hugely physical environment.
Yeah.
It's something that I know you've campaigned hard for.
Yeah, I don't know how you guys found it, but it's one of those things where you're trying to grow the brand and you're trying to commercialise the team. But at what point does that come from a detriment to the performance? So there was a lot of discussions in place on, okay, this is the kit, this is what the kit looks like for men and women. But actually we fought quite hard that actually this is the one thing that we need to push, that needs to be different about the women's kit, which obviously went against the original branding. But actually, if it means the team will perform better and feel more comfortable and be able to be their best selves, then absolutely it needs to be pushed. And obviously, Bristol Sport and relevant stakeholders brought into that. And that's why you've seen now for the past few years for Bears now, our shorts have been dark colours, so black and navy, for that reason, which was obviously different to the men's kit.
Yeah, and same with City Women as well.
Yeah, I think that again comes back to that we've got a great supportive Bristol Sport environment. You know, John Lansdowne and Gavin, they were completely sit down, listened to us and understood why we're potentially changing the brand colours for Bristol City.
Brand guidelines always there for rewriting, don't tell John.
Obviously the red, white, red is something that's always been there for Bristol City, but you know, you almost go in expecting a fight as to hear the reasons why, but we're surrounded by some great people that were accepted and understood it, and we're like, yeah, like we completely understand. It's just, spoke about the girls coming into the training facilities and not having to worry about what they're doing, but they're there to perform. So one small aspect of that is if the girls are on their period, and I like to use the word period because I think it should be spoken about more. It's not a taboo. Let's, you know, you've got males working in the female game, accept it, it's a thing.
And to be honest, you know, if it wasn't a thing, the human race would stop.
Yeah.
So it's quite important.
A little bit, yeah. So those girls that are coming in to perform for that game day on that Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, they shouldn't need to worry about if they've come on their period and think, oh God, during the game, am I leaking? Am I looking? Is anyone else seeing this? They can pull that kit on and understand that's just one little less thing that they need to think about. And if we can help that, we're there to help them perform. So it was a really great change that we could make.
Yeah. And how far is it that you know, I remember when I started here, there was no women's actual kit. You know, you wore the men's kit. You know, and that was, you know, just under a decade ago. I mean, this is how far it's come, and I do think this whole time of change that's happened over the last 5 years, particularly, has accelerated. And I kind of just am excited to see what we've got coming next. I mean, there's been so much development. What would you want to see as the next thing that you think could be needs to be tackled? I mean, we talked about periods. I know you said about the wellness tracker, that both teams have a wellness tracker, but actually taking the best bits of the men's teams and actually then adapting it and bespoking it to the women.
Yeah, I actually said on a podcast recently that women's sport is so fresh. You don't need to just keep copying the men's model. It's a fresh product. So create a new model, create a new business model. We don't need to keep copying men's product. Just make it something new, and you know, start from research and see what's best for the women's game, not try and work out how does the men's game adapt. And you mentioned about the wellness tracker, and you know, that's something that you do at City as well. So that's something that we brought in a couple of years ago now, and our athletic performance coaches are absolutely great. So both are male, so Gareth Harris and Tom Oglethorpe, but both did their research studies in their degrees in the menstrual health. We're so lucky to have them, and this is where that wellness tracker has come from. So they've both recognised how much menstruation impacts the women's game. So our wellness trackers we will complete every training day that we have, and we will similar complete it by a certain time, so that it will then be done in time so that coaches can review and check maybe if they need to amend someone's training, even things like, do they need to have a chat with someone, do they need to work out if they need to speak to someone a little bit differently today. And on that wellness tracker we'll have things like, how was their sleep, do they have a good appetite, what's their stress levels like today. And they're very important because a lot of our girls still are dual career, so a lot of us are still working full time as well as trying to play in a professional league. And then it will go on to another section that will track your menstrual health. So are you on your period? When is your period due? Are you expecting or experiencing these sort of symptoms such as bloating, breast tenderness, heavy bleeding? Are you in a lot of pain? And it will track how much pain you're in. And other things that people wouldn't necessarily know are associated with the menstrual cycle. For example, do you have aching joints? And it's really interesting, especially for me on a personal level, because I've spoken a lot about having endometriosis. So I've got a long-term injury at the moment. I tore a couple of ligaments just before Christmas and had surgery. And just in one of my physio appointments on Monday, Kate Tyler, our head of medical, just asked if I was experiencing any other joint pain around the body. And she said because that is actually linked to endometriosis, and that's something that I didn't know. So, you know, it's great that we have this support system and that the staff are doing absolutely everything that they can to be putting us in the best position to perform.
Yeah, to perform at the very best that you can. And Grace, I know obviously City Women are all full-time professionals, and that wellness tracker is completed every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. Every day it bases sort of what our performance and medical team, they lead the day in the morning to figure out how the girls are. And I think very similar to the questions of how they've slept, how long they've slept, how they feel, how certain areas of their body are. For example, you know, obviously some heavy legs after the weekend, and then it bases almost what their day may or may not look like. And even things down to what Daisie said of they might put on there they're a little bit stressed. You've got some that every day will have that stress and it might not be as out the ordinary, but you know, you start to twig what's right and what isn't. I completely agree with Daisie. When we look at the moment, there's a lot of changes in women's football, so talking about the menstrual cycle and pregnancy, and when you try and look into the research and the evidence that's out there, it is all based around a male athlete. So I think absolutely there's things that we can take from the male game to do and not to do, but I think realistically the scientific performance of a female body is amazing and it's so clever, but there isn't enough research out there. So that's where it starts, is how is this research being affected on a female footballer, rugby, sports? And I think we can learn a lot from other sports. When you look at gymnastics, cycling, athletics, they've done a lot obviously into female performance and the body, so I think there just needs to be a bit more out there with potentially the sports that have originally been male leading. We really need to make a stance, because at the moment there's not enough evidence out there to show what effect the menstrual cycle has on injury, rehabilitation, or just their everyday performance. So that's where it needs to start.
Yeah, I mean, you say about taking the best bits of the men's programmes but then adapting it to the women's programmes. We've touched on pregnancy. You know, that is something that is becoming more and more prevalent, and I guess there's kind of two aspects to that. One is, you know, elite female professional sportswomen deciding when to have a baby, because traditionally it was always you had to get your sporting career out of the way and then you would, you know, you'd wait till you were retired and then you would time your family around it, which is precarious and difficult, because it normally means you've got to cut short your professional playing career. So how that is embraced, and obviously we've got Abby Ward celebrating her pregnancy as an England rugby international, and we'll come on to talk about that. But then there's also the actual, you know, and probably this is more where you're coming, Grace, in terms of actually what the contracts look like and the maternity pay. You know, the Icelandic captain has just recently won a landmark case on her maternity pay against Leon, and you know, that's only something that's going to come more and more. The Everton player Tony Duggan has just announced her pregnancy. Absolutely,
and I think clubs are starting to learn, and it's all well and good them having a policy in place, but I think clubs need to dive into what that policy actually looks like. realistically, if you was an employee at a business, at a club, off the pitch, the same way these players are employees, there would be maternity leave, there would be maternity pay cover, and they would be supported coming back into their role. You see it quite common in women's football. They are relatively short contracts, 1-2 year contracts, which is currently growing. If someone was to get pregnant towards the end of their contracts, that isn't a justification for not renewing that contract. So I think the responsibility falls on the clubs as they're individuals. But then outside of that, what that looks like for supporting that athlete, so during their pregnancy, for exercise and training loads, post-pregnancy, what that looks like. You're a professional footballer that's trying to return to sport, that's just gone through a crazy, your body has just gone through something crazy that it's not been used to, but also now you've got a little baby to take care of, so clubs need to support that. So I think it needs to go outside of a policy. That's the starting point, but what else can these clubs be doing to support those players?
And you know, we can talk about the commercials behind it, but actually the argument is, you know, it is about equality in terms of how you treat people in society. There should be equality in how we treat people in society, and actually by not treating it as equal, you're doing yourselves a disservice, right? Because actually there is so much that can be contributed by having those people involved, you know, and I'm thinking of Abby in terms of the tremendous amount of her experience and wealth of knowledge. You know, just because she's pregnant doesn't mean she stops functioning as a professional rugby player.
Yeah,
and obviously she can't do the contact, but
yeah,
the other benefits that she can add.
Yeah, and like Grace touched upon about integrating those players back into training once they've had the baby, but actually ensuring that they're still an athlete even up until they've had the baby. So Abby is still in full-time training. Her training is just adapted, whether that means it's more skill-based and like you mentioned, less contact, then so be it, but she's still treated and she still acts like a professional rugby player because that is what she is. So.
Yeah. And you talk about needing more research, you know, physical research into it. But it is interesting how it is moving, and actually, like you say, the research needs to be greater into showing the benefits of training through your pregnancy. And often there's a lot of, you know, there was a lot of research into how much more your endurance levels are improved when you come back from having a baby.
Yeah, and I think that's where we talk a lot about sports stars being role models, and this is kind of like a new audience that you can kind of adapt as well. So there's probably plenty of new mothers or expecting mothers that think, oh, now I need to stop exercising because I'm having a baby and I don't want to harm the baby and I need to put my health first. But actually people like Abby are showing that they're competing at the highest level and doing the most elite, you know, training schedules, and she's still growing a baby and it's healthy and it's everything is perfectly fine. And I hope that also encourages like people in the community to go and do the same and show that, you know, you can still move your body and do things for you even though that you are an expectant mother.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, talking about the maternity rights, that is an important part. There's a financial element to that, but certainly, you know, you sort of say, well, there's companies and businesses that would have to adhere to it. Or, well, at the end of the day, professional sports clubs are companies and businesses. Yeah. So, you know, you have to. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we are clubs that are fighting for equity and fighting for equality, then you have to do every single part of that, right? So part of that is ensuring that your athletes are protected whether they want to go be a mother or not. The same way if someone else, like I say, in the business was wanting to go start their family, they wouldn't have to wait until the end of their HR career, for example. So yeah, absolutely, it needs to be looked at and supported. And as you said, Tony Duggan, who's currently pregnant, who plays for Everton in the WSL, it'll be great to understand, I guess, all the research that's gone into that, how they're managing with that and what that looks like, because that's where it's going to lead the way. I'd expect her to come back. She's a brilliant player, a great performer, and the same obviously as what you have in-house as well. So I think we can learn from each other and, like I say, learn from other sports. And there are players that have gone through pregnancy, and it's just ensuring that, okay, what did we learn from that and how can we take it so that girls that are playing, those young girls, can also change that mindset that it's okay to go away and have a baby and come back, and it worked.
You know, we touched on the fact that there is a financial implication, of course, you know, in its most basic terms. If you've paid a player to be a professional athlete to compete for you and then they're pregnant and can't physically compete on the field for you, that has a financial impact in that you've got to replace that player from a performance point of view. But actually, that is rewarded hopefully by commercial sponsorship, where we live in a world where, and we have seen a huge movement over the last few years in commercial sponsors embracing the women's games, across all different sports, and actually it very much feeling like, if we are supporting the men, we want to support the women as well. And I think that's something you've experienced, Grace, firsthand up at the Robinson Performance Centre.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, commercial sponsors are great because we get some money from them. But that's not the only thing that we need out of that. We want to ensure it's a partner that is engaged with us, is supportive, and again has the same moral high ground that we're trying to encompass for our own players. So ensuring that those partners are on board, they engage, they want to actually come to our games, they want to see the players, they want to be involved, and a reason why it's very different. This is where we say sort of it differs slightly from the men's game, that there is commercial opportunities down to the viewership of the game. The women, we're growing and we're there, but we want you to come on this journey with us and understand what we're trying to achieve. So it's really important to have those commercial partners that are on board with us. We this year obviously had our first commercial deal that was away from the men's club, and it was for the Bears Women and City Women with the Wave, and they are a great female-led company as well that is really engaging, and they're really trying to grow their women's image for what they do over in their company. So those partners are really important to us and that want to get involved, and we're great that all of the partners that we currently have at City are all on board with us and engage with what we want to do and are on the sort of story with us.
Yeah. And I think it kind of helps as well that we have people in the business internally like Sarah Farrar, so came to us from Chelsea, but also not many people know she's an ex-professional tennis player, and she is a massive advocate for women's sports. And I know for me personally, seeing her work and the influence she has and the work she produces is so aspiring to see, but also it helps me a lot more because she's so emotionally attached, I think, to women's sport. So the deals that she's trying to bring in, and the, like you mentioned, the Wave partnership, it's focused on the women, and it's built with women in mind. So you're talking to our audiences, you're not trying to talk to an audience for male players and trying to
build something on.
Yes. So for example, the Wave do sister sessions where they're women only groups and skateboarding lessons, and they want to increase their audience with female attendances. So it's a mutually beneficial partnership, but it helps when you have people at the top that are pushing that.
Yeah, and like you say, you mentioned Sarah being new here. We've got a CFO as well who's a female. It sounds like women are taking over.
Yeah.
But it, but that does come from. I'm a mother to a boy and a girl. My 15-year-old son constantly says, "Oh, when's International Men's Day?" And I have to have that conversation every time about the fact that the reason why we have to have an International Women's Day is because there hasn't been parity for from since time began until now, and actually, if we as an advanced forward-thinking country can lead the way as to how it goes, hopefully we can have some influence over countries across the globe. You look at other countries and where some countries are in terms of just looking at what's gone on in Afghanistan over the last year in terms of how their women's rights, and in Iran, the women's rights have been constantly eroded. And actually, if we can celebrate the fact that women can hold as equal positions as men, it's not trying to have what, it's about parity, and that's kind of where everyone should be united, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's those conversations that your son asks quite a lot come up, but I encourage those because it gives him that opportunity to learn and to understand it. So hopefully he can take that into school, other people can take it into work and understand why we celebrate women and what it means. I work in women's football, but that doesn't mean I'm only going to employ women or anyone. I want the best for the job. So regardless of what sport you're working in and what business that is, whether you're male or female, if you're the right person for the job, then that should be why, not regardless of your gender.
And what can we look forward to this next year then? We've had some great games at Ashton Gate here at the stadium. Obviously, both of the women's teams play in different places, but we try and have them at the stadium. It just comes down to actually a pitch share because we have so many games at the stadium. What do you want to see over the next year or so? It's probably a tough question to ask, but is there something that you think that's the next big change that I will have a goosebumps moment looking at, thinking, yeah, we helped that?
I know it's quite vague, but again, back to that commercialisation, I'd like to see a lot more partners that are women-based companies, so whether they target women's health or things like that. I just think we're in such a period now, pardon the pun, but we're talking a lot about periods and menstruation, and there's now lots of studies coming out about breast health. And if I was a tech company that looked into tracking the menstrual cycle and suggested how to train or how to adapt your nutrition, I would absolutely jump on board with a women's football club or a women's rugby club, because that would be the advocates, and they're kind of selling itself. And like I mentioned, we're so lucky that we have people like Sarah that are driving that, but I would like to see that that driving commercial ship, because in return it only directly brings back the investment. And I know that's such an easy thing to say, to have more investment in the women's game, but I think we're getting to such a point now, especially in women's rugby, where you have some players that are professional and other players that are driving an hour after work to come and play for free, and I don't know how long we can keep expecting players to compete at the same level. So I would like to see a point where everybody's offered a paid contract.
Yeah, and that's the next big step.
Yeah.
What about women's football?
Yeah, echoing Daisie on the commercial side. We've spoke about red shorts, and we've spoke about having women's fit kit. There's a number of other things that have been based around the men's game. Football boots are designed for a male's foot, so there's a lot of different implications for your weight distribution that football boots need to take into account, and sports
the ankle
bras.
injuries as well. I was reading. I mean, that is a whole. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is one of those ones that you suddenly read and go, yeah, that's completely obvious. Of course, the bounce.
Absolutely. Look, and there's a reason why, but it doesn't mean that you sort of stay within that. Everything has been designed in football for a male, so it's starting to look at other things as to how it's distributed towards the women. And another huge, like you say, a business venture that needs to happen is sports bras. So many women aren't educated correctly on what a sports bra is or why you have that, which therefore affects your performance based on the weight distribution across your chest. So I think that is starting to. I believe Nike started to look into that, but I think other brands need to come on board to celebrate again why it's not just paying some money and going on the back of the shirt. It's what are you doing to celebrate these women and have an impact on their performance and their stature, I guess.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, I could literally sit and chat all afternoon. It's been great to hear your insight into it, and thanks very much for giving up your time. I know you both you're in on a day off. We're on a match day, as this is pre-recorded.
Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, it's been great hearing your insight, and thank you for your time, and best of luck for the rest of the season to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.